One of the things that we have talked about a few times in various facets of our discussion this semester is things on cloud computing. And I thought this would be a good standalone topic for us to take on here in our last class session together. So I've put together some things for us to talk about, and I would encourage you as we go along here to ask questions and such as you have ideas or thoughts or things that you are interested in. But one of the things that is absolutely true that we are seeing playing out in corporate IT is we're in an era where several big areas of focus are present in corporate IT. The cloud is one of them. Things focused around big data and analytics related to big data, mobile computing, and then companies really wrestling with how best to take advantage of things related to social media and how social media affects and disrupts business processes. I don't know if any of you are sports fans or have been following it, but we saw a very interesting example of that here over the last few days involving the University of Tennessee and their efforts to hire a new football coach, which were rather radically affected by things that played out on social media. And so basically a group of people aligning themselves on social media had the opportunity and had the impact of disrupting business processes for an organization in a very significant way. What we're seeing, of course, is, see if my pen's working here, it is, the world is largely moving to a digital environment, and we're not going to see that changing. I think we're going to see the pace of that change accelerating, and there are many, many products, as an example, we could look at that started out as physical products and now have moved into a world in which they are largely digital. Great example of this would be what we see happening in entertainment. You know, it used to be if you wanted to watch a movie in your home, you had to purchase a DVD, which of course was a physical item that you would have to maybe go to a place like Blockbuster, or you might have mailed to you through a company like Netflix, but you had to have a physical media that had the content on it that you would then put into some kind of player. Well, of course, that's still an option, but increasingly now people are using streaming. And there's no more physical device. It's just digital content that is sent into your home in a totally digital format. And so that has been a significant disruption. That's not only changed video entertainment, but the whole music industry works very, very differently now than it did a couple of decades ago as a result of this. We see this with books. I don't know how many of you, as opposed to purchasing physical books for your classes or for your pleasurable reading or things of that sort, have moved to electronic equivalents instead of physical equivalents. Well, in really every industry, there are people looking at this issue of how can we take something that is physical and move it into a digital realm. I think you're even seeing that in education, with this idea of people taking classes online as opposed to having to go to a physical campus and sit in a classroom. They can do things perhaps from the comfort of their home. You can participate in a class that's actually physically located thousands of miles away. And so industries out there are wrestling with, is there a way that we can make our operations more digital? Beyond that, as we place our focus specifically on things related to computing, a big element that we are seeing now is software is being consumed as a service. So the idea is that whereas before if you were looking to purchase a Windows-based operating system for your computer, laptop, or whatever, you might go to the store and buy a DVD with Windows 95 or Windows 98 or Windows 7 or whatever have you on it. But we've talked about this before. Now you're seeing with not only Microsoft but other companies as well, this idea of you licensing a software product and then you just on a continuous basis getting updates to that. And it moves into more of a subscription-based model. A lot of companies are moving to that because it's attractive to them, because it gives them an ongoing stream of revenue. One example of this that I noticed recently, I don't know if any of you are familiar with a software product called Quicken. Quicken makes software for managing your personal finances. And pretty much every year Quicken releases a new version of their software, and I use it, and I and many others often follow a pattern of you don't upgrade every year, but maybe every other year or every 3 years when there's an accumulation of enough new things to make it worth your while, you buy the newest version. Well, this year, for the first time, when Quicken brought out Quicken 2018, they changed their business model. And now when you buy Quicken 2018, you are buying a Quicken subscription that you have to pay for on an annual basis. And if you stop paying, then the software stops working. It's kind of like the equivalent of a magazine subscription or other things you would subscribe to. And the idea there is that Quicken says this will be a way then that we can just on an ongoing basis deliver new content and updates and things like that, which is part of them trying to sell it to you. But the other side of it is they want that ongoing stream of revenue. Well, what other products are you familiar with that have moved to that kind of model? Adobe is not shy at all about trying to liberate people from their money, and Adobe has moved to that model as well, where they want you every year to be paying them some money to continue using their applications. What else? Absolutely, not only with their operating systems, but most notably with Microsoft Office in the form of Office 365. For college students, they'll give you Office 365 for free. It's kind of so that you'll use the software and like it and decide you want to use it in perpetuity. But then once you graduate, and if you buy a computer that you're going to use, you're going to have to start paying them a licensing fee for Office 365. So this idea of no longer thinking of software as something that you buy and own, but thinking of it more as a service that you are purchasing that you're going to have to pay for on an ongoing basis is the direction a lot of this is heading.
Are they making it cheaper since they pay every year, or are you paying the cost that every year that you previously paid?
Most of the companies that I've seen, well, let's talk specific examples. Adobe seems to have lowered their price a little bit with the idea that you're going to have to pay them every year. Microsoft seems to have followed a similar pattern. But with Quicken that I mentioned a moment ago, it looks like the price of an annual subscription is about what you would have had to pay for a one-time purchase. And by the way, if you go out to Amazon right now and look up Quicken 2018, you will see hundreds, I'm not exaggerating, of reviews of customers lambasting Quicken for that decision. Consumers don't like it. But that's the direction things are heading. So sometimes there's a cost savings, but a lot of times not so much.
So it's going to get to where it's unaffordable even having applications.
Well, I think, I don't know how it will play out.
On a personal level, maybe businesses can about it.
I don't know that, I don't know. Certainly companies aren't going to want to price themselves out of the market. So it will be interesting to see how it plays out. I do know that, and to continue with the Quicken example, a lot of people have said, I'm not going to pay that. I'll just use, free web tools that are out there. I'll just use a spreadsheet. But a lot of people, probably like myself, who use Quicken extensively, we'll just pay it if we want to keep using the product. Particularly in the case of Quicken, they don't really have a lot of competitors. So it will be interesting to see how it plays out. Certainly, I think we've seen in the music world, the model has been disrupted, and people have just gotten used to the new reality of the way you buy music and the way it works in a digital sense. And so I'm sure the people that are promoting software as a service hope that consumers adapt to this in a similar fashion. But we'll have to see. I can say that the one thing that we do seem to be seeing come to the forefront is companies are working very hard to emphasize simplicity. They want people to, if you will, use the cloud without focusing on the cloud and without having to get bogged down in the complexity of it. We certainly see that in mobile devices, where companies are making very, very sophisticated and very, very powerful devices, but they really want to make them very, very simple to use, as evidenced by the fact that you see young children now walking around with smartphones and other similar devices, because the companies work on keeping those things very, very simple. Well, what we are going to focus on for the sake of our discussion here for the next few minutes is this idea of cloud computing. And undoubtedly, you have heard about cloud computing. Maybe you've read a lot about it. Some of you perhaps are more knowledgeable than others. But we're going to focus on the opportunities related to cloud computing as it ties into the theme of this course, which is in use of enterprise computing and enterprise information systems. Companies now really have three different options. They can go with what we would say would be the traditional option, which is on-premises, or usually you just hear that abbreviated on-prem computing, which is the idea that we're going to buy the computing resources we need. We're probably going to put them in some kind of server room. Maybe, obviously, some of the technology will reside on people's desks, but we will own the computers and they will be physically situated in our facilities. That's an on-prem solution. The alternative, which we'll define and talk more about, is a cloud-based solution. With a cloud-based solution, a lot of your computing resources are not located at your facility, but are some remote location that you likely connect to over the internet to make use of computing infrastructure at a distance. All of you have experienced cloud computing this semester, in the context of the simulation game that you've been playing in lab time. You log in to an SAP ERP system that's actually located in Milwaukee. Now, for the sake of your being able to access the system and make use of it, really doesn't matter that the system is in Milwaukee as opposed to being located here on campus. From your perspective as an end user, it's really irrelevant. It's very, very transparent. So a lot of companies are electing to put computing resources in the cloud and make use of that as an architecture for deployment. The third alternative is some kind of hybrid solution, which would be a mixture of those things, where you have some computing technology and some of your processing power focused on your premises site, some things in the cloud. If we look at some of the things that are here on the slide here, over 65% of enterprise IT organizations will commit to hybrid cloud architectures encompassing multiple cloud services, as well as private cloud and our non-cloud infrastructure by the end of 2015. So we're past that particular time frame, but a lot of companies are moving to this kind of hybrid structure. when we look at cloud, who are some of the major companies that are players in cloud computing? Amazon is clearly one of the big ones out there. Amazon has extensive cloud resources. Who else, though, besides Amazon? Microsoft, what's their cloud offering? Azure. Who else is playing in this space? Google. Okay. Who else? IBM is here, absolutely. Anyone know of any others? What's that? Oracle has some cloud-based things, absolutely. You have Rackspace is another company that has extensive. You have SAP that has extensive cloud offerings. And that is certainly not an exhaustive list, but that is a list of some of the major players here. And in fact, for many of these companies, getting involved in cloud computing has been a key to their business success. Amazon is a great example of that. Most people think of Amazon as a company you can buy books and just about anything else from these days and have it shipped to you. But in fact, Amazon doesn't really make any money doing that. They actually break even or even lose money on that facet of their business. Where Amazon makes a lot of money these days is on their cloud computing resources and what they sell to companies in terms of cloud computing. So what has happened over time is this, and this is the diagram here in the center, and you can see a timeline here as we go from 2012 to 2020. Obviously the years are not so much the point here, but the idea is that what we are seeing is that on-premise computing is falling off, and companies' adoption of a pure cloud strategy is accelerating. And the open question is, will we ever get to the point where everything is cloud and computing is treated as a utility? And this brings us back to something that we started this semester with, which was the idea espoused by Carr in his idea of IT doesn't matter. Cloud computing didn't exist at the time that article was penned by Carr, but you'll recall Carr made the analogy that computing can become like a utility. And that fundamentally is the idea behind cloud computing. If you need computing power, you no longer need to buy hardware. You can just buy the computing power in form of something that comes to you from a cloud-based service provider. And so is that the direction that we're going to see companies heading? And the fact is, a lot of companies in the last couple of years, and still to this day, are wrestling with how they bring cloud into their organization. Now, we'll expand this a little bit more in coming slides, but why would a company perhaps be hesitant in moving to the cloud? Why would a company want to be careful here? Okay, so we'll say data. There's two elements there. We'll say data ownership, or you could be just talking about data location. Even if we agree that just because it's on the cloud doesn't mean you don't own it anymore, still, it's now no longer sitting in your server room down the hall. It could be sitting in a server in Virginia or Arizona or, quite frankly, who knows where. And so that is something that might cause a company to hesitate. What else? Why else might a company hesitate in moving to the cloud? What's that? Security. What do you mean? How and why is security an issue?
When people feel like having it on-premise in your own server is more secure than it's having it.
I think the interesting thing, and that's very well stated about security. There's security perception, and I think there's also reality, which may be different from that. I think most companies initially feel like, well, if it's in our premises and we have control over it, it's more secure. But in fact, whether or not it really is more secure depends a lot on how good your company is at security. It's kind of like most of these cloud providers up here. Well, let me tell you a story. When Amazon got started, long before cloud computing, when they first got started as a book selling company, they were smart enough to realize that e-commerce was very, very new, and a lot of people were really nervous about e-commerce. So if you had never bought anything online before, and maybe you didn't even know anybody that had bought something online before, it was a totally new thing for you, what's the one thing that you would expect that most people would be nervous about? And that's, is it safe to be typing my credit card number into a website? Is somebody going to use this to steal from me? Well, Amazon recognized that, and they architected their systems in such a way that they made it impossible for people to have their credit card information stolen. What Amazon actually did is develop a kind of a very low-tech solution where customer information regarding credit cards got loaded into one computer system, and that system did not actually process credit card charges. All of the customer's credit card information, transaction information, got written onto disks. You know, we're going back decades now at this point, and those physical disks were moved to another machine that processed the credit card transactions under the supervision of people that watched everything that was going on. And they architected this solution because Jeff Bezos said, if word ever gets out that some of our customers have been defrauded, that could kill our business. And they didn't want their business to be killed, so they were really, really careful about it. Well, in terms of, let's say, hackers, who has more to lose by being attacked by hackers, you and your individual company, or somebody like Amazon if word gets out that Amazon's cloud services have been hacked? I mean, if word gets out that Amazon's cloud services are insecure, they stand to lose millions of dollars. It could kill that entire business for them. So in reality, these companies that we have listed here on the slide as being cloud service providers, they employ the best and the brightest people they can get their hands on to help them secure their infrastructure. So it's kind of like, if we used a physical analogy, you might take really good care to lock up your home when you leave, and you might have a really good lock on all of your doors, but Amazon has the equivalent of locks and armed guards and cameras everywhere, and they're doing everything they possibly can to try and ensure security. So that's why I put here, security is absolutely a reason why some companies hesitate, but I think it's perhaps perceptions about security that drive their decision as opposed to the reality of it. And so that's something that we probably would expect to see change over time. Why else might companies hesitate?
Quality of connection.
Absolutely. Quality of service, quality of connection. And once again, this is where there's the perception and there's reality, and they may diverge. But the thought is, well, if my data is residing hundreds of miles from here, what happens if the internet connection goes down? Or what happens if a cable gets cut? Am I going to lose access to resources that are very important to me? Now, the fact is, you could lose power at your local facility. You could lose network connectivity in your local facility, but people seem to think it's a greater risk when you have that physical separation. One other I'll mention here in terms of why companies hesitate, and then we'll move on, even though this isn't an exhaustive list here, is budgeting. And this gets into really the accounting side of how companies manage their IT decision making. If a company goes out and wants to, let's say, purchase some new servers, and so let's just say, for sake of example, a company's going to go out and buy $100,000 worth of new server equipment. That gets budgeted as what companies would call a capital expenditure, which means that the way we plan it, the way that we report it in our financial statements are reflective of this being a long-term investment that we will amortize typically over a period of years. Cloud computing is typically not handled as a capital expenditure, but just as an operating expense. And so, as opposed to this idea of us cutting a one-time check for $100,000, now we might be looking at cutting checks for $2,000 a month to our cloud service provider. And the reality here then, it looks very different. I mean, $100,000 for a server that, let's just say, we know we'll use for 4 years and then we'll have to replace it, versus paying $2,000 a month. Well, $2,000 a month, $24,000 a year, 4 years time, that's $100,000. It's pretty much a wash there if we're assuming the life of the system that we're buying for $100,000 is 4 years, but you pay for it totally differently. One is a check that I have to cut up front. The other one is something I pay on an ongoing basis. Now, for a large company, they might like the idea of the capital expenditure. That might fit much better with their overall budgeting process, but a smaller company might have a real hard time coming up with $100,000, whereas $2,000 a month might be very, very doable for them. So depending upon how we handle our budgeting and what our resources look like will determine how this plays out and could cause us to hesitate. So we talked about why we would hesitate, the upsides here. And there are just four that we'll spend some time talking about here. One is this issue of faster deployment. You know, you undoubtedly have other classes that you have taken where you've talked about things like rapid prototyping and other things that companies do to try and reduce the cycle time and be able to deploy systems much more rapidly. Well, cloud gives us the ability to fully deploy systems in a matter of weeks. And in addition to that, we can deliver these cloud-based user systems that might be much, much easier in terms of being simpler for end users to be able to actually make use of. This faster deployment, I think we talked last class period of, if you wanted a HANA system in your organization, you've got to order the hardware. And it may take months for that hardware to come in. We could, in the next 15 minutes here, using just our laptops and a credit card or some other payment medium, we could spin up servers in the Amazon cloud or any number of other cloud providers in a matter of minutes. And so in organizations that I've been a part of in a consulting capacity other than the work here at ETSU, although ETSU is using some cloud-based systems now, companies are using these cloud-based systems when they want to test things out and when they want to move very, very quickly. Because you can, in an afternoon, have the equivalent of a new server farm up and operating. Access to innovation, multiple innovation releases per year, customer feedback, a cornerstone of updates. The idea here is this is when you are using cloud-based software as part of your infrastructure. And we talked about an example of this just a few moments ago, which is Office 365 that Microsoft has come out with. This is now a software product where Microsoft has said we're going to release updates and new features on an ongoing basis. As we create them, we're going to roll them out to you. And if we stop and think about that for a moment, we were talking just a few minutes ago about subscription-based versus customers buying a fixed product periodically. If Microsoft, let's say, is going to sell, and I'm going to use totally made-up numbers here, let's say a new version of Microsoft Office would cost me $100. Well, Microsoft knows that in order to entice you to buy the newest version of Office, which we'll just say, we'll call this Office 2019, in order for them to entice you to buy that, they're going to have a whole set of new features that they're going to have to be able to dangle in front of you to entice you to purchase it. So as they come up with these new ideas, they kind of put them in a bucket, if you will, until that bucket gets big enough where they think, okay, we've got enough new features now, this will motivate people to update, and they release the new version. Well, if the model instead is you're going to pay us $20 per year, we no longer have to accumulate these new features in a bucket, because we don't have to entice you to upgrade to the next generation of the software. You're going to pay us $20 a year no matter what. So as we come up with these new items, we just go ahead and roll them out. We don't hold on to them and try and accumulate them to make a case for why you should buy the newest version. So as opposed to once a year or once every 2 years, you get 30 new things, whatever those new things might be. With this subscription-based model now, you might get 1 or 2 new things a month, because there's no incentive for those to be held on to, and customers can now count on these multiple innovation releases per year. You're kind of always getting new things as they're created by the software company. This also is very, very nice from a support functionality. If you were thinking about Microsoft, how many versions of Microsoft Office are out in the market these days that they have to release patches for and security updates for, and perhaps have to field customers' questions related to, and they have to support not just the current version, but several prior generations of it. Well, if we move to this subscription model, everyone will be running basically the same software package, and we can focus our support on that. So in theory, what this provides is customers faster access to innovation. Agile deployment, configuration and integration, rapid process configuration, faster adoption, no lengthy upgrade cycles, packaged integration. This is definitely talking about benefits in terms of a corporate environment. We talked about how companies are pursuing agility in their infrastructure. Well, the idea here is if I realize a new opportunity, but it's going to require computing power for me to be able to take advantage of it, I can get access to that now very easily through the cloud. In addition, because of things we've just been talking about here, I have a much faster adoption model. I don't have these lengthy upgrade cycles because I'm not taking on a major upgrade every year or 2 years. I'm integrating a much smaller sequence of upgrades on an overall ongoing basis. And then lower total cost of ownership, faster time to value. I don't have to pay as much up front. I don't really have to worry about maintenance costs or things like that, particularly associated to hardware. And I have these pre-packaged integrations that come to me from my cloud provider. So having talked about some of the fundamentals, let's get into some of the terminology and some of the architectures here. And this is where we'll spend probably the bulk of our discussion on in time remaining here. There are 3 major service models associated with cloud computing, and this is not exhaustive, but it does hit the three major ones, and that is software as a service, or SaaS, SaaS, platform as a service, or PaaS, and then infrastructure as a service, which is IaaS. And then in terms of deployment models, we have three options here. We have the public cloud, we have the private cloud, and then we have the hybrid cloud. And so one of my goals for today is to make sure that when we wrap up our time together, you'll understand these 6 different things and certainly be able to answer questions about it successfully on the exams and so on. So we'll focus initially here on software as a service. And so one of the questions is, obviously, what do each of these terms mean? How are they different? What are the things that they have in common, and so on? Well, this table, and by the way, I'll put these slides up as I've done with our other slides up in D2L after our session together today. Software as a service is the first one that we will focus on, and it is this leftmost column here in the table. And you can see that with software as a service, you really get 3 different things. You get software applications, you get operating system, middleware, and runtime, and you get servers, storage, and networking. Basically, software as a service gives you the most complete set of resources. Software as a service is designed for end users, and typically it's delivered via the internet. So when you buy software as a service, you are buying an application that is managed by another organization using their hardware, their operating system, their runtime environment. All you are focused on is the software itself. Now, what that means is you as the user of this system, and the user of this system could be you as an individual using a piece of software, or the you in that sense could be a company that has purchased an application that's software as a service. An example of this would be Salesforce.com. Some of you are probably familiar with that as a sales management tool. A lot of salespeople use. It's a cloud-based solution. You, as a company, you as an end user, you have no control over the underlying platform and infrastructure. Salesforce.com presents itself to you in a web browser. What operating system does Salesforce.com run on? Well, you really don't know. And from your perspective, it doesn't really matter if it's Windows or Linux or some other esoteric operating system that maybe you've never heard of, because you have no control over the platform. You have a very limited set of functionality available to you that comes from the functionality that you have licensed. So you get a bundle of features, and that's all you get. And you have no control over when they update the software, when they release new features. You're just an end user of the system. Now, it's not a perfect metaphor, but one example of this that you could think of would be something like Facebook. You know, let's change Facebook's business model a minute here, and let's assume that you had to pay $5 a month to use Facebook. Well, you pay $5 a month for your Facebook account, and you get to use Facebook and all of the features that Facebook provides. And maybe they introduce new tools, they add new games, they delete certain features. You get to use what they put out there. You have no control over the underlying platform. You have no control over the infrastructure. You have no control over when they update things and how they manage all of that. You're just paying to use that application. And there are a whole host of application products out there that are sold now in this software as a service model. One example that we'll follow up on of a company that sells this is SAP, Oracle. Other companies of that sort will sell your company ERP systems and other things that run in the cloud. And you pay them a monthly fee to use their particular software that comes to you through a cloud service provider. That's software as a service. The idea here is what you're paying for is the use of the software. Questions about software as a service? Anybody familiar with any other examples of software as a service beyond what we've mentioned here? Google Sheets would be an example of software as a service, absolutely. Really, any of those Google tools that they have would be an example of that, I think. Any others anyone can think of? Netflix, I think Netflix would probably fall into an example of software as a service. You don't really know much about the underlying platform, and if we want to think of it in this way, Netflix, you don't have control over their library of resources that they deploy. Sometimes they add new things, sometimes they take things away. What you're paying them for is just the use of their application. Well, platform as a service. In platform as a service, this is the second column here. Notice now the focus is not on the applications. You are not paying for and getting access to the applications. What you are paying for and getting now is an operating system and, of course, the hardware and other resources that operating system is running on that you can then deploy your own applications on top of. An example of this would be, I'm sure a lot of you have used remote desktop services where you can be at one computer and you can remote desktop to another machine. Well, Amazon has a product called Amazon Workspaces, I believe is the name of it. And you can pay for an Amazon workspace, and you could sit down at your computer and you can remote desktop into Windows Desktop on Amazon. And all you have there is your Windows operating system. And at that point, if you want to, you could install Microsoft Office, you could install any other software that you legitimately own onto that operating system, because what you are buying from the cloud service provider is the operating system, the runtime environment, and the hardware that they are running that on top of, but you're not getting any applications other than a fairly bare bones operating system. Now, you have no control over the underlying infrastructure. Now, by that I mean, most of the time your cloud provider is going to say you can choose between these processor speeds, and you can choose between systems that have this much RAM versus this much RAM and so on. You have some control, but you don't have the level of control that you would have if you were actually buying it yourself. You don't know what brand the processor is. You don't know, who made the RAM chips. You have no control over the infrastructure, but what you do have absolute control over is the deployed applications. So let's talk about this. SAP sells SAP ERP software as a service. Now what that means is that you are in a shared tenancy environment. Your company and many, many other companies are using the same ERP system in a shared tenancy environment, and your resources are all kept segregated. You once again have seen a great example of this semester in that you have played the ERP sim game in an ERP system that is also in use by at least a dozen other universities. And depending upon how resources have been deployed, as many as 30, 40, 50 other universities are on the same system as you. But you don't see them. You don't have to worry about them. They're on the same system. That's all managed by the hosting provider. and you don't have to worry about that. Well, in platform as a service, you as the company totally control what software you put on there. So this is not that kind of shared environment. You have control over the configuration settings. Let me give you a really simple example. When you log in to your SAP system this semester, somebody have to remind me, when you log into the SAP GUI, on the left is the easy access menu, and on the right there's like a picture. I don't know what that picture is that I just drew there, like a person with their legs chopped off or something. I don't know. But what's the picture that you guys see on the right side of the screen? Anybody remember? What's the picture you see when you log in this semester? Is it a picture of a computer, or is it a picture of like a blue like wave thing? Anybody remember? Is it a blue wave thing? Okay, well here's the thing. If you said, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we put the ETSU logo up there? Well, yeah, that would be cool. But the thing is, because we're in a shared environment, whatever logo goes there, everybody sees. So the people that are using the system at Ohio State probably wouldn't like it too much if the ETSU logo was on there every time they logged in, nor would you like it if every time you logged in the Ohio State logo was there. So they put that generic picture there. Okay, we have to do that because we're all in this shared environment. That's software as a service. But if I go with platform as a service, I have control over the software, so I can put whatever I want there, because this is now totally under my control and my organization in terms of the actual software. So I'm buying the platform, I have to supply the software. The last alternative is infrastructure as a service. And you see with this one, this is where basically you get the least things. You get just the computer at the lowest infrastructure level. So you notice you're not going to get an operating system. You're not really going to get any kind of software except some kind of basic software that's going to let you connect to it. But you're going to have to put your own operating system and then your own software on this. So once again, you don't have control over the underlying physical infrastructure, but you do have control over the operating system, storage containers, so on and so forth. So you might license this hardware and you might put, let's say, Red Hat version, and I don't know my Red Hat version numbers, but you might put Red Hat 13.2 on here. Well, that's up to you. You have licensed basically the computer hardware, and then you put on the operating system you want, and then you put on the software that you want. So if we look at this, the one of these that gives you the most is software as a service. The one of these that gives you the least is infrastructure as a service. But this is all about flexibility. Why is this important? For this reason right here, the money side of this. The more you want the cloud service provider to provide you, the more you're going to have to pay. Now, some of this is a matter of, okay, if I buy infrastructure as a service and I install, let's say, Windows Server, I don't know, I think there's a Windows Server 2018. If I'm going to install that on my IaaS platform, I have to buy my Windows Server license. So it might have been cheaper for me to license it as platform as a service, because then my service provider, my cloud provider, probably buys Windows Server 2018 licenses in bulk from Microsoft, probably gets a little bit better deal. But the idea here is I can buy as little or as much as I want based on my needs as an organization, with the only real limit being the size of my checkbook to be able to pay for this. Okay? Any questions about this? And the reality is that companies that make use of cloud Perhaps use all three of these. It's not like you'll just see one of these being used in a particular organization. We use different variations for different things. So that's the cloud service models, cloud deployment models. Okay? Well, what's the private cloud? Well, let's do this instead. Let's start here in the middle with public cloud. When most of us think of cloud computing, we probably by default tend to think of the public cloud. The public cloud is a company is a cloud service provider, and they sell their services to the general public. Basically, if you have money, you can buy things from them. And so an individual private citizen can buy things, or a large industrial company can buy things. Basically, they'll sell to anybody who has the money. And they follow, in general, a multi-tenancy principle, which means that they set up these very, very large server farms and put thousands of machines in them, and then sell that computing power to whoever wants to buy it. That's a public cloud. And that is what most people tend to think of when they think of cloud computing, because it tends to be the most common example. But there are other variations. A private cloud is the idea where inside of my organization, we're going to set up our own cloud that we manage. So this sounds kind of weird, but the idea would be that we would go out and we would buy the computing infrastructure to set up a cloud inside of our organization, so that people working on projects inside of our company could leverage these resources on an on-demand basis. So the idea might be something like this. We go out and we buy a few servers to serve as a private cloud. And then we tell project managers in our organization, when you're working on a project and you need computing resources for like a 6-week period to work on creating some kind of product, you can use our private cloud. And we'll spin up a system in our private cloud. We'll use virtualization to allow you to create this. You use it for the duration of your project, and then maybe when you're done, we kill it off and recycle those resources and let other people use those. So we use virtualization to allow us to get the same kind of flexibility that comes from a public cloud, but we just do it strictly inside of our organization. A lot of times companies will do this when they want the benefit of the flexibility of the cloud and some of those things, but there are reasons why they can't go with a public cloud provider. Maybe, for example, because they're doing very, very sensitive work. Maybe they're a government agency, and by law or just because of safe security practices, they really can't go out and put things in the public cloud. Hybrid cloud is we're just going to bring together a mixture of this, where in our organization we might have some products that use the public cloud, we might have some projects that use the private cloud, and so we just kind of mix and match these two clouds, sometimes maybe even hooking systems together, some of which are found in the public cloud and some of which are found in the private cloud. So what we have is this ability now to create this kind of new hybrid landscape, where inside of an organization where we're saying, okay, we have this new project coming up, and for this project, here's what we estimate the computing resources to be, and now we no longer have to think in terms of, well, let's go out and buy those. Now we can think in terms of, okay, well, should we do this on the cloud? And if we should do it on the cloud, do we do it on a public cloud? Do we do it on a private cloud? Do we do it in some kind of combination? And we start to think through all of the different options here. And what we're looking for is really the right mix. Do we want some kind of cloud solution? Do we want some kind of on-premise solution? Do we want some kind of managed solution? This would most typically be associated with software as a solution, where basically we're buying something that's provided to us by another organization. One of the things that we want to see is whatever solutions we put together, we want everything to be able to interoperate. And we have challenges that come from the demands of our IT professionals and the demands of our line of business professionals. These are our, if you will, our business managers, which is to say, not our IT people. What companies are increasingly seeing is IT people are kind of being cut out of these discussions, and line of business managers are going out and contracting for cloud services to meet the demands of their part of the organization. Now, first of all, why do you think line of business managers are doing that? They control the money. So the line of business manager says, I have a budget of $1 million. I can go out and spend $100,000 of that on Salesforce.com to make my salespeople better at their job. So I'm going to do that. So part of it is the line of business people have the money, and the service providers are happy to take their money. And so that's one reason why this happens. Why else do you think line of business managers are doing some of this? Why would IT get cut out of this? What's that? Why is it easy? Let's talk about that for a second. What's that? Faster?
You don't have to go through all of the stipulations that he's going to put on what needs to be set up and how it needs to be set up, all of the policies that needs to be in place.
Absolutely. In a lot of organizations, what happens is the business manager goes to the IT people and says, basically, we need, fill in the blank there. We need a system that'll do this, or we need a system that'll do this. And what they hear back from IT is, okay, we can do that for you, but it'll take 6 months, or it'll take 8 months. Or, no, you can't have that. And maybe they don't even tell you why. They just basically say no. Well, in those kinds of organizations where that's the dominant culture, line of business managers have realized, I can just buy this stuff without ever even talking to IT. If IT's going to, every time I ask them for something, they're going to give me a hard time, then I'll just take my money to somebody who's glad to take my money from me, and I will buy these software solutions. So let's stick with our example. The sales manager goes out and buys a contract with Salesforce.com, and it's pretty attractive. Let's just say hypothetically, he's paying $5 per month for every salesperson that uses the system. So it's not a big budget breaker. The salespeople now have a really incredible tool to make use of, but in so doing, we have potentially just created a problem for our organization. What potential problem have we just now created? Okay, we are now back to, that's very astute observation. We have now returned to the data silo problem, because now we have a silo of data sitting out here on the Salesforce system, and we have our in-house data store, and these are now not connected in any way. And I can tell you, I've been in organizations before, and I don't know if this happens at ETSU, I'm not making reference to ETSU specifically with this example, where there are systems that are being used by the line of business that the IT doesn't even know about. doesn't even know the line of business contracted for. And in some cases, the only way they find out about it is because this external service provider tries to connect up with their system for the sake of pulling data out or something like that. And that's when they find out that their corporate data is now being used on a totally different system. It's very likely that IT, for example, has data storage standards and has policies related to security, and who knows if that's being upheld or not by these third-party service providers. Now, the reality is that Salesforce.com is a really good software package, and they are very, very secure. So we're not shooting arrows here at Salesforce.com, but what we are saying is that what's happening in a lot of organizations is companies are using software as a service as a way to cut their IT people out and allow business managers to go directly to get the solutions they want from third-party providers. And the danger in that is that over a period of time now, we wind up with these silos of data. And to go back to what's the dangerous part of this is, who knows if this information stored in the Salesforce.com system is a fully accurate picture of what's happening in our organization, which means that if somebody's using this to make decisions, they may wind up making a bad decision because they don't have the full picture. So there's a real danger in this, which is why what you want to see happen and what's critical for this is to come up with a way that line of business managers can go out and get what they need, but that we don't lose the interoperability between the core systems of our organization and what we have on the cloud. So we want, what has to happen here is really the cloud has forced IT in a lot of organizations to become more customer responsive. It's kind of like one of the great things in business is customers get better service whenever there's competition. You know, if there's only one restaurant in town, everybody has to eat there, like it or not, because you don't have any other choice. But as soon as the second restaurant moves into town and now there's competition, then you think that it's likely that that's going to improve the choices that you have and you're going to get better quality food. Well, we see that same thing potentially playing out here. Now IT has to compete with other service providers, and that could be a very, very good thing for IT. And in fact, what a lot of organizations have done is leverage this structure inside of their organization, where they've said to line of business managers, okay, if you want this system, we can provide it to you as in-house IT, but you're going to have to pay us for it. And IT becomes essentially a service provider to other parts of the organization. But the challenge here is line of business managers now find themselves far more empowered thanks to cloud computing because they have choices that they would not have had before cloud computing came into the mix. Questions, comments?
Question would be, in this case, I once had somebody who complained that as IT, as a system administrator, the whole idea of cloud kind of reduces the job they need to do and cuts out the job. That's one of the advantages of the cloud. You don't need the data center anymore. You don't need the team of experts that used to control that. So is there a remedy for that
To give you a general answer, I think that like just about everything else we see in life, there are some things that go away and then some new things that come in. And so I do think that there are some jobs that will become less critical and less in demand, and other jobs that will become more in demand. You know, I think, for example, if you're going to move very heavily to cloud-based things, you are going to have rock solid network infrastructure. And you are going to have security professionals that really know what they're doing. And you're also going to perhaps have to have new employees that know how to test and validate security and do other things on remote systems. So the role of the system administrator might be less focused on managing the system that's sitting right in front of him or her, and more focused on managing the corporate resources using totally different tools, understanding that they may never actually even see the machines that they're managing. But I don't think it's going to be the kind of thing where, as cloud comes into an organization, the number of IT professionals is going to cut in half. I think you're going to see some positions become less important and some positions become more important. I think that a lot of what you see in organizations now is companies wrestling with, what's the best way for us to deploy this? What should our architecture look like in the future? And you have a lot more discussions on deployment architectures, strategy around IT, and a lot of high-level discussions, and perhaps less discussions on, should we buy a Dell server or an IBM server? So the discussions, if there's still discussions going on, they're just very different discussions. And I tend to think they're probably more interesting discussions. I mean, the discussion about should we buy an IBM versus an HP server is not exactly super interesting or exciting to me, but the discussion of should we do cloud or on-prem and what are the ramifications of it, that's a much more interesting discussion. I think that what this does is this brings IT more to the forefront in an organization. So in that sense, I think this is good. But you are definitely going to see this change organizations moving forward. That's a very good observation and question. Excuse me. Other. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Mike Ferguson, is that who you're talking about? Absolutely. And I don't know if any of you were, well, none of you would have been. There was a speaker that came in earlier this week from Eastman Chemical that talked in the undergraduate capstone course. Mike Spence, he's a member of our advisory board. And he's involved in these decisions for Eastman Chemical. And he's talked about the extensive ongoing debates they've had in the organization regarding how to manage this, and including some new things that I didn't even know was possible. I don't know that this is a corporate secret. I guess since he discussed it, it wouldn't be. But he said, for example, they have a data center, but they're discovering that they may not need the data center anymore because a cloud service, they can do stuff with cloud service providers. So now what they're having is cloud service providers coming to them and saying, hey, what if we take over your data center and put our cloud resources in your data center? So it's kind of like now you're like outsourcing the management of your data center to a cloud service provider, and you know, there's all these new options that are coming up. Those are kind of really exciting and interesting discussions, and I think that's kind of what we're going to see over the next decade. I think a lot of you graduating here in the very near future, you're going to be thrust into a lot of these decisions inside of the organizations you're going to go to work for. I'm going to skip over this slide, and just as an example of some of this right here, an example of software as a service. There's a company out there, I don't know if any of you have heard of, called Success Factors. They're an SAP company. There's a company out there called Hybris that sells applications. Hybris is an example of a company that just all kinds of things related to online sales and analytics. Success Factors is customer relationship management and things of that sort. But what you're seeing in software as a service is a lot of things focused, a lot of applications focused on people management, like HR moving totally into cloud-based software as a service solutions, things related to companies managing their money, things related to customer relationship management. There's just all kinds of software as a service options out there that companies can buy. And what this is really, really great for is this is great for small businesses as well as big businesses. Because a lot of this, you're licensing it, paying something like you pay X dollars per month per user. So if you have 3 users, it's not a very big bill. If you have 300 users, it's a little bit more, but you only pay for what it is that you're actually using. In terms of platform as a service, SAP has a product, and by the way, I don't know sometimes who names SAP's stuff, and they should be shot a lot of times. I don't know if I told you this story, but back when the whole internet boom was going on, SAP decided, like how Apple puts I in front of everything, what was it, iPod and I whatever. Well, SAP, to make it sound like they were all hip and cool and internet-y, put .com on the name of their product. So you could buy SAPERP.com and SAPCRM.com. And they just put .com on the name of all of their products to make it seem like they were internet enabled. Well, then, now more recently, HANA is the big SAP thing. So for whatever reason, marketing people and SAP decided, let's put HANA in the name of everything. Okay, so SAP has something called SAP HANA Cloud Platform, which has absolutely nothing to do with HANA, the in-memory database tool. This is just a cloud platform that you can license, and you can run apps on. You can create your own apps, like run on mobile devices. You can create websites. It's basically a platform as a service, and they call it SAP HANA Cloud Platform. And I cannot begin to tell you how confused people get by that, because they hear HANA and they think it has something to do with the in-memory database. Nothing to do with it at all. SAP has infrastructure as a service, SAP HANA Enterprise Cloud. Once again, nothing at all to do with HANA, the in-memory database, but a product that they market now. So companies are out there selling these alternate products. So as an example of this, what a lot of companies are doing is, let's say, for example, all right, so let me explain this diagram to you. We're a company, and we on-premise are already running SAP ERP. So we have the system like you guys have been playing the game on. And what we want to do is we want to add success factors. Success factors is a human capital management software tool. Basically, this allows us to do personnel stuff. Hire people, pay them, cover benefits, do all our HR management, and so on. Well, we have some choices here. We could, we want to interface this with our SAP ERP system. So what we could do is we could buy the full cloud human capital management system, which means that we have SAP ERP running on our servers, but it connects to a cloud-based success factors. And so all of our HR functionality takes place in the cloud, and it connects up to our ERP system. So we might run transactions in our ERP system that results in it retrieving information from the cloud. But to the end user, they don't know what's coming from our server in the server room and what's coming from the cloud. They really don't care. But for the IT people, what you have is you have a cloud solution and you have your ERP system that are on-prem. The other alternatives are, we could go here to the left and do some kind of hybrid system where we have SAP ERP on premises, We have the core human capital HR management functionality. We have that on premises too, but then just some third party tools like maybe talent solutions, workforce planning, analytics, we use that in the cloud. So the idea here is our human capital management solution is partly in the cloud and partly on-prem. Or we can do what's called side by side. And here now we have SAP ERP on premises, we have the core HR on premises, we have the core HR partly in the cloud. So even the core is split between the cloud and on premises, and then we have the talent solutions in the cloud here as well. So the whole point of this diagram is, even if you have some stuff that is traditional and is on premises, what a lot of companies are doing now is they're connecting that up to things in the cloud and interfacing those systems in a way that to the end user it seems very, very transparent. So what we're seeing, and I'm going to skip over another slide as well, we might have our on-premises, this would be our ERP system. We have sales and distribution, we have supplier relationship management, we have financial accounting, we have supply chain management, we have advanced planning optimization, we have human capital management. We have all of that right now in-house. And the thought is that maybe over time what's going to happen is we're going to start moving some of these pieces onto the cloud. So maybe, I don't know what this represents here, maybe like 5 years down the road, we still have sales and distribution, financial accounting, and human capital management. We still have those on premises, but we've moved some of the other things around people management, supplier management, customer management. We've moved that onto the public cloud. And then we've moved some things like supplier relationship management and planning optimization, supply chain management, we moved that to the private cloud. So the idea here is, the thought is that organizations are going to see much more of these hybrid solutions over time, where they're connecting in-house and external systems. And here you see some very clear things that become important. We have to have rock solid security. We have to have very, very effective integration. Just because these are housed on different machines and in different locations, this can't be clunky to the end user at all. And our operations have to be rock solid. We can't have our network going down or other things like that, because if some of your stuff is on-prem and some of it's on the public cloud, and you lose your connection to the public cloud, you're in trouble. So what you're seeing is a lot of companies right now are trying to figure out, what's our strategy here? But what I can tell you is, I've not talked to any company of any size in the last few years, and when cloud has come up, heard them say something like, oh, we don't think that's important, or, oh, we're not doing anything with the cloud. What you hear instead is, yeah, we're doing this on the cloud and we're still trying to figure out this, or we're still wrestling with this. I've yet to talk to anyone who said either, A, we're not doing anything with the cloud, nor have I talked to anyone that said, oh yeah, we got the cloud totally figured out, we know exactly what we're doing. It's one of the big open questions out there that companies are trying to evaluate and figure out strategies. So the great thing about that from the perspective of each of you is, as I said a few moments ago, these are things that you may be involved in organizations you go to work for, figuring out infrastructure, figuring out strategies related to deployment in these environments. And that was our discussion. So questions, comments? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
I taught on-premise and private cloud was the same thing. So I want to know the difference between on-premise and private cloud. Thinking a company that has its own data center is considered on-premise, and if that is a data center, that is a private
Your point is a good one. I think the idea there is that on premises represents what we had in house before cloud, the traditional way of doing IT. Private cloud represents our shifting our focus internally to treat computing more as computing as a utility, and what you see a lot of times now is that results in a change in the way the software is written. The software is more focused on virtualization. The software has more ability to scale up and scale down resources as needed. So the software has some different functionality. But you're absolutely right. You know, these two things that have the circle around them here, those are both sitting on our machines. But perhaps the on-premises one are running, if you will, right on the bare metal, whereas the private cloud stuff is running on virtualized servers and reflective of a more contemporary deployment architecture. You do sometimes, too, see private cloud being spread across like a company that is a collection of many, many companies. And so they have a shared private cloud across all the companies that are in their organization. So you see things like that as well.
Is that what we have here with the virtual desktops and stuff?
The virtual desktops here, if you're talking about, and I can't think of the name of the system that they use, there's the Citrix system. That would probably be private cloud. I think that would be a good example of that, because it's a system that's housed here in the university, but there are times when the load on that system is probably close to zero, and there are times when the load on that system is pretty high, depending upon how many virtual desktops are in use at a time. And so resources scale up and scale down dynamically. I think that's a pretty good analogy of a private cloud type environment.
And our storage occurs somewhere in a centralized location.
The storage area network is here on campus as well, to my knowledge.
It's not
Now,
actually on a machine line, it's all in some central location.
yes, on a SAN. And now some of that's in the process of getting ready to change, but yes, that's the way it has worked. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
From your explanation, I figured out there's a software I came across one time. It's an open source application. It's called OpenStack. So what it does is, I go to Amazon right now and they have 5 servers. And AWS shows me the 5 servers, and I can request any amount of resources I want from these 5 servers. Like I said, I want one server with this core and this. Now AWS virtualizes on top of these 5 servers and give you just the resources I want. Now OpenStack is an open source version of AWS, and most enterprise companies can use that to turn their data, on-premise data warehouse to become. So when you said that, it just came to me that might be the difference between on-premise and
Absolutely. Yeah, and you see that with, I think Azure has a stack like that as well, where you can make the hardware that you own behave almost like a cloud service provider. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the nice thing about that is, if you could imagine, we have lots of projects in our IT, and maybe in a way of managing costs, every project uses those resources, and the system keeps track of it and bills the individual projects for what they actually use in terms of computer time and resources and so on. Great comments and questions. Other comments, questions, observations? All right. Well, I have enjoyed having the opportunity to work with each of you guys this semester. Next week, I'm looking forward to getting to hear from you and your experience with your teams and your projects. And so, yeah, as you have any questions about that, please do stay in touch, and have a great rest of the week.